Okay. Stream is on. On you.
Ooh, wait a second. Why is Bart doing everything twice? No. I'm a little concerned about him, but okay. Okay, and I'm going to turn on Twitch stream. Start streaming.
Now recording.
Welcome to the Yanggang Roundtable. It is 4:11 p.m. Sunday, November 1st, 2020. I am here with both Fays, Karen, and Dr. Quintus Jett. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jett. My name is Shale. We are a basic incompatibility podcast. You've been here before. So we talk about electoral politics, poverty, and basic income. It's been an incredible year for that. So welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Well, it's great to be here. Quintus Jett. Let's see. PhD in organizations. I'm really focused on a strategy for public causes. Public causes can be political, but it can also be issues of nonprofits. I really enjoy talking with social entrepreneurs and social innovators. And I can be very good with talking with them about figuring out like what they should do next in order to bring into more fruition their idea.
That is something that Faye Doney is perpetually asking. So I'm glad that you two are together.
All right.
Faye, aren't you always like, you really have a quest mentality, and I like it. You're very active in doing whatever you can to promote basic income, just like I am, opportunistically. You just kind of get in where you fit in, but you're always asking, what can I do next? What can I do next? So,
I like focusing on actionable items because I think we don't focus enough on actionable items. We like to complain, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do everything. And so, like, if I can find advisors to, like, ask questions, then I can learn what I need to do, and I can also learn how to teach it, right? And so, like, I'm only a chain, and then I got all these networks that I can just, like, oh, you got a question, I finally have something for you, right? But, like, if I don't know how to do it because I've never done it, or I never had somebody teach me, then I don't know. There's almost like feeling insecure about the knowledge I'm giving as well if I'm not like, getting it from somebody else. So it's almost like we need a buddy system to feel like you got it.
Faye is a doer, but more importantly, she's a connector. She connects people to other people who can get it.
Yeah, because I don't pretend to know everything, right? I don't pretend to like be able to do everything either, but I know somebody who might.
Well,
That's
actually,
very,
there's
very
a term for this,
useful.
and there's a term for this, and I think usually we use this term in a negative way, but I think this is a very positive. It sounds like, Faye, you're an enabler. You enable people, like through your connections, you're able to get them and able to do things that they're trying to do.
I call it inspiring, right? Like I just, you plant a seed, but the seed has to do some work on its own too, right?
Yeah.
Gotta be in its own environment to do the growth necessary. But I have a lot of ideas, and I know like things people need, but execution cannot come from me alone.
Yeah, she's also traveling so that she can actually physically connect people by going to those places, going to them, and bringing information or people that she met before to the new place. So she just traveled from where you are towards where I am, Dr. Jett.
Okay.
All right. So yeah,
well,
this morning we were talking. This morning you and I were talking a little bit, and one of the things that I get to hear from you when I talk to you is a very like human picture of who Joe Biden is. And I feel like we're really missing that perspective here in our podcast sometimes. So I invited you to come and talk a little bit more about that, because we only have one more day, but it's a big one, right? Pretty soon
Right.
it's going to be
Right.
the big one is
Right.
coming. The final day of voting is happening. So if there's any point in talking about that, it would be right now. We're going to get it done. So,
Oh yeah.
so
Yeah.
I feel like in Yang we know Andrew Yang pretty well. We have this sense of who he is, what he's all about, but we don't really have a good sense of who Biden is. We might have a sense of who Trump is because we see him in the news all the time. And so, I mean, what kind of person is Joe Biden in your experience of him?
I mean, it's a career of public service in the sense that in the positive sense, but maybe put it this way, especially with the election about to be kind of culminate. I think this is probably my 10th presidential election where I've been like old enough to actually pay attention to what's been happening and know what that experience of having this is what I think based on what I want and what the people around me are thinking, and then being confronted with the reality of what the rest of the country thinks. So it's different. So it's like the first one was 1984. So I think I was kind of leaning towards Mondale, and I think my university was like the only one compared to our peer institutions that wanted Reagan. That most people on my campus wanted Reagan. And so then I'm like, okay, but I most people I know like Mondale, and in other our peer universities they all like Mondale. But then the results came in, and Reagan won everything, just like except for Minnesota, you know. And so it's almost
Was he
like, well,
the
what is
first
it? What
like
is was
real
I?
TV star?
What's
He
that?
was he was the very first. I believe he was like the first real TV star to win a presidency. Like
He
when
had
Reagan
experience as
won,
an
right?
actor. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He knew TV. Um, But I think with Biden, I think it's looking at Biden's appeal. I think it is also looking at our times, you know, um, that he's really like he strikes as everyone is just a decent human being, you know, and when you really stop to think about it, when in terms of this pandemic, the way you notice how he talks about tragedy is a bit different than most politicians. I mean, he's talking about pain. He talks about like those of us who our loved ones having to in a hospital in a ventilator, the dying like without their family around, the missing piece of someone like a relative who that hole that's in you, like from your relative who was passed away from COVID. I have one of my students from Rutgers Newark. He lost two uncles to COVID in New Jersey, and the way that Joe Biden talks about it invokes how it is talking with my former student. It's like he had an uncle, one of his uncles who's very dear to him. He started getting sick, and he they go to the hospital, but they wouldn't test him, and back and forth, and he dies of COVID. Then he had another uncle who lived next door, but who was undocumented, so he really couldn't. And they tried to keep him and feed him and take care of him, and then he passed away, and so that's almost like the opposite of what the current president is. I mean, I think Donald Trump as an individual seems incapable. He can actually sometimes feint it, but he really doesn't speak to the pain of people or exhibit very much empathy.
And you
And
feel that Joe Biden is able to authentically bring this empathy to bear because he has lost people of his own. He's lost his own family members.
just think about that, right? It's like you're family. It's like you're married and you have three young kids, and to lose like a daughter and your spouse like that, like and then it's like he was in that sense he was a single dad in the 70s. I mean, so
And
I
that's where
actually
his politics remain, the 70s.
but that's just reality. I mean, maybe the people who are older actually have some sense of understanding and wisdom about how about living. And I think that's again speaks to some of the issues with Trump again. It's like, it's like you would think that people who live longer would have some wisdom, You know?
Well, think about the flip side. There's also this indoctrination that older people have where we go, oh, that's just grandpa. He's from a different time. We excuse his bad behavior that way, right? So it's really 6 1 half dozen the other. It's really, it could go, you get the good with the bad when you talk about age, right?
But that's the thing. There is a difference. Just like there are people who are young. Some people who are young do really stupid things, and then there's some people who are young who actually do make smart decisions. And so that applies for everyone. We especially in positions of leadership, we should be discerning about people and their character. And I think that's what's starting to play out in this race, like this issue of character. Like, who is this person? Like, not just what they believe on this one position, but the totality of it. I mean, who are they? Do I trust them or not, or why?
So what gives you the sense that Joe Biden isn't fainting in the same way that Trump is? Because that's my sense, that it's just a performance from both of those men.
I pay attention to him and I watch him. I mean, if you watch Trump over time, it's pretty clear that he lies a lot. Or
yes, it is, and I agree.
Relationship with the truth.
And I see that in Biden as well.
Well, no, not really. I mean, it's like he actually did a number of things. I've noticed that in the online world, we tend to talk about only certain things about Biden. Like there's certain conversations, but we don't talk about others. Like the crime bill always comes up. But what we don't talk about with the crime bill is at the time in the 1990s, there were a lot of people who were for there are actually Black communities that wanted tougher stuff on crime. That was what was going on in the 90s at the time. Or the Violence Against Women Act. That was groundbreaking. Biden was a part of all of that. He was a leader of a part of that. And that's the thing. It's interesting. Maybe it's a good sign, but it works against him that he doesn't talk about it as much. He talks about it sometimes, but he doesn't talk about it all the time. And in this environment, he almost needs to brag about it. But I'm glad he doesn't, in a way. I'm glad he doesn't brag about that. And in this environment, you have to be like Trump does. Like Trump is very good at taking credit for things that he didn't even do. People believe it.
That makes a great politician.
Yeah. That's the number one skill that you need to succeed in this country, taking credit for things other people do.
And that's horrible.
Yes, it is. We're a horrible place. We have a real problem.
No, but that's the thing, that we've not always been that horrible.
No, we haven't.
I think but that's the problem about Trump. It's like he actually normalized this. He's made it even more normalized to do this kind
He's
of
the
stuff.
Capstone. It's been normalized forever. He was the last piece of a long process.
It's different when the president does it. And then we know this. It's like leadership matters. It does matter what the person in charge does. And,
because the language is so powerful, right? Especially who don't even have very developed critical thinking skills, or non-neurotypicals. It's a little harder for them to discern truth from just even phrases, right? And so if you have someone just like throwing out phrases that they've never even been exposed to, they might take it very literally as well, and so there's a lot of power to language, and he uses it very dangerously, in my opinion. Just how he labels it the China virus, that is a very toxic example of language being weaponized.
If there's one area where Joe Biden is absolutely verifiably better than Trump, it is there. It is in rhetoric, is in language, not policy.
Really?
Oh yeah, Biden's rhetoric is way better. It doesn't call it the China virus. It is not as racist. There is a little bit of real problem with racial Trump rhetoric. I don't have to say it because everyone leans left, right? We don't even have to have it. It goes without saying. I have to say the things I don't like about Biden because that's where we disagree. But Trump is a monster, of course.
Well, so for Shale, it isn't about Trump versus Biden at all. What we're looking at,
it's populist versus duopoly.
Yeah. And it's not just Shale. Shale is a representative of many people who also feel the same way Shale does, which is that that the elections are rigged, and therefore, picking either one of them is awful, and that Biden is just not as good of a is not as good of a choice as we could have had, and there's no way to get the good choice unless we just somehow throw our hands
The
up and do something completely
only
new.
way I can convey to the DNC that I feel disappointed with the party I registered with is if I withhold my vote from their bad candidate who does not represent me. So that's the position I'm in.
Okay, but I'll speak to like a certain kind of individual group that I think I find very interesting in this whole race, and that is the Republican voter against Trump. Like sort of the Lincoln Project people, and there's another separate group, Republican voters against Trump, and they have throughout the past like several months, they have testimonials during the week of Republican voters against Trump, and I do think I resonate with what the kinds of their approach to this. It's like, look at the character of let's look at the country and not just the party stuff, and then just look at, I mean, having a president who does things that you would not like in your personal life with your friends, with your kids, you would not even tolerate it for a second. And yet he does it. And so, and I think that's what's kind of going on in the electorate. It's like, it's because there are enough people, I think, at this, on this Republican voter against Trump thing, that's what keeps this race, I think, like more competitive and leaning in Biden at the moment, because on the left, what we have is a lot of people who are just really focused on their disappointment,
Yeah, that's me. I'm super focused on my disappointment. And I don't have kids because I've never ever had any economic stability because I grew up under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and they both failed me. So here I am.
I wanted to actually ask Quintus, maybe you could tell the story that is often told to me by the local Democrats here about how Biden used to take the train in order to go to work and get home to his kids every day. Do you?
Oh yeah, but he was a senator of Delaware, so Delaware is not all that far from DC, so he could afford to not just get up an apartment in DC, but he could actually take the time, or he would take the time to be able to go home. And so by going back and forth, it's like on the train, I mean, he was the kind of person who would actually talk to people, connect with them. And actually, it's important too. It's like a good politician, I think, connects with you even when you're not a big person, even when you can't really do anything for them, even if they can't necessarily, vote for you. I mean, I think that's a gift of a good politician.
So
they're not that instrumental.
For me, that story speaks to. I don't want to. I'm not actually here to convince people to vote for Biden or to vote for somebody particular. It's not. I do what I do, and other people do what they're going to do. But I do want to give Shale sort of, or anybody else who's listening, a chance to believe that Biden could be good for us, right? So for me, that story and the other stories about how he lost his wife or how he had to be a single father and all of the things, the struggles that he had to go through, even though, he's of the wealthy class. Of course, he's going to have help. He's going to have money to handle all these situations. But I feel like some of these struggles that he had and the choices that he made are just so different than what you could imagine Trump making or some of the other, people who've been president.
I just don't see how
they really show.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
Of him, that's more connected to the people.
I'm sorry, there was a pause. I thought you were done, but I hear what you're saying. Okay. I hear what you're saying. I just do not see how these character examples translate to policy. When you look at his policy, that's what matters. It's real grim. That crime bill, we keep talking about it for a reason. He wants to cut Social Security. He will veto Medicare for all. He will not give us single-payer health care like every other developed country in the world. He'll do everything to stop it. Not that different from Trump. Very conservative. Okay.
No, oh my God. You're so off on this. I mean, so basically, if you actually look at what Biden's been doing, he's a coalition politician. He did not need to ask Bernie Sanders for his policy people to convene sort of like joint policies, and he didn't need to, but it's smart to him to have done that, and he did do that. And if you look at what he's talking about basically the next step from what Obamacare was, which was it didn't have a public option, and so it's actually moving things along. So it's like that's actually, in terms of policy and coalition, he's a coalition builder. And if you wanted to have a sense for where he's going to go and the reason to be excited, I would refer to Andrew Yang was on with David Axelrod from Obama's advisor, and they were talking about this. Like, where are we now? Well, number one, the damage that Trump is doing to our institutions and to our culture is horrible. It's really horrible. So we need to get him out. Job one, he needs to be gone. But even after that, it doesn't mean that going back to the past was great. We need to move forward. And so they talked about, Axelrod and Yang, that we really do need to reboot America. We really need to make this country what we always said it was, but never, we promised it to be, but it never was. That's what we have the opportunity to do with Biden, that we will absolutely not happen with Trump in the White House continuing. It's never going to happen.
We don't have the opportunity to do that with Biden or Trump. It's not going to happen with either of them. And I don't understand why you think that the things he says mean anything. It's lip service. He's a professional politician. He said all kinds of things his entire career. It doesn't. He's not going to give us anything he hasn't given in the past. Look at his voting record. That's what we get. We get the same milquetoast neoliberal globalization we had in the 90s.
You continue to ignore the things that he has really done in terms of the Violence Against Women Act. We're ignoring that.
The Violence Against Women Act is good, but economically, I have no future, under him or Trump.
Let's stay with that. Do you realize, it was only in the 80s that date rape was actually talked about as something that people should not do. It wasn't always like this. And that even in terms of marriage equality, it was actually Biden first who basically kind of opened the door even before Obama and saying, hey, I'm for it. So maybe sometimes I wonder if part of the issue is I feel like my generation, Generation X, we failed and baby boomers in that we didn't communicate enough where the progress is happening and how it happened. And so everyone's able to look at, things aren't ideal like I think they should be, so you're bad. That's what I think I see too much of.
I think we need to just address a major thing, regardless of all of whose faults and blah, blah, blah. We have money that people are not getting, right? Deep down, that's we're just broke. And because of this solid foundation not existing for anybody in a world that continuously gets more expensive, I heard the story from this guy who owned a hospital. He was up there in ages, oncology doctor. And he's like, my dad, he worked off of a janitor's salary and put me and my siblings through college. Okay. That's not the world we live in, right? So the equation to a successful life has completely changed, right? Good luck even paying your rent with a janitor's salary this day and age, right? So this is a foundational problem, and it's really hard to translate that to these people's awareness, because the government is in bed with the banks and the IRS and involved with all the drug industry. And so there's a lot of greed happening within these systems, because they're like, oh, well, this is where the money is. I guess I'm going to latch onto this. And that's fine if that's your strategy. But all the money is being kept within a small network that isn't reaching us individuals on a grassroots level, if you will. And we don't have a system where that works. Even if we change a bill here and there, it's still not happening, right? So but that's what's causing all this crime and abuse, and it's the core problem to a lot of the systems we have. We would have to rewrite the entire system in order to even recognize that the lack of money has caused all these problems. It's at the core. That's the cancer we need to find and cut out, right? We need to focus there, because the throwing people in jail because they can't pay, this or that, and like they got desperate because of survival needs, and we never learned how to like actually garden. We didn't learn how to like do these services or even recognize when our body's telling us we need help, right? And so if we don't have a foundational education on self-care, we're going to continue to have these problems. We're going to have people continue to take drugs to fill that need, and like that's the hyper focus and why we're so passionate about UBI, right? But the older you are, it's harder to recognize that what you grew up with is not what's the reality.
So maybe part of the problem is that Biden is of a generation where they feel like they have been making progress, and then the young people are coming up to them and saying, wait a minute, you are calling this progress, but we have no economic future, so we feel like we've been thrown into a stone age or some sort of dark ages. So the two,
No, I think
the idea that of having made progress when you're financially, being disabled by the economy, is difficult to reconcile.
But I think there's also a misconception about it's the same. All these people. Especially who, a lot of them have children and grandchildren. It's not like they don't know. There's a difference between sometimes in life you want to get something done and you're not sure how to do it, or you have to work with the existing system that you have in order to get there.
So the idea is that they don't know because maybe they are in the wealthy class, So a lot of our decision makers are wealthy. If they have a good job, they're doing okay.
I guess I'm getting the point is you could actually be in position of power and still not know how to fix these problems. So even if you care about them, you could still be like, shoot, how do I do this?
Yeah, this is something I wanted to speak to, is that, yes, you might have a better policy and get it enacted, but there's very little feedback on the implementation and the management and the bureaucracy of the programs. And, I voted for Biden. I think we need a stopgap to the disaster that we're having. And I know that he has the slogan, Build Back Better. That is going to require feedback from the people in the programs. And this is one of the reasons why I connected with the Universal Basic Income community, is the real actual things that are going on when you apply for these programs or you're in these means-tested programs. There's no feedback loop. You've got this thing called a fair hearing process, not good enough. And we especially have this situation where our policymakers are put into an uncomfortable position of having to defend these programs, but they don't go far enough to hear how they're being implemented. And for instance, the Violence Against Women Act, and of course, all roads to people like us leads to UBI, is you come up short of a solution. So this last month was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I was made homeless because of domestic violence. And that's why when I saw what UBI was, it took me like 5 minutes to figure out how that would help. And maybe I'm going to be, 5 minutes. And so I'm going to be a little picky on the Democratic female politicians not getting that as fast as I did, because they're plugged into the policy, they're plugged into the hierarchy, but there's something stopgap that's making them pull up short to UBI. And what we need to do is go ahead and vote for the stopgap. I'm with Andrew Yang on that. But then not let up one iota. Don't make any assumptions about either the policies that happen or the implementation of those policies, or something stopgap like a monthly stimulus. I was very encouraged by Kamala being picked. because she did, Ed Markey, Bernie Sanders, and Kamala supports a monthly stimulus, but we need to turn that into a full-time UBI like they're going through in Canada, where their stopgap measures now being positively received to become a permanent UBI.
Actually, that's actually the UBI in the sorry.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I was thinking, I mean, in that sense, I think I always got the impression that even Andrew Yang himself has had issues with this, like figuring out how to do this, right? Because you'd think, here's this pandemic. If there ever was a time for this UBI solution, it's now. And guess what? Amazon's making a lot of money. It just seems perfect. But it hasn't happened. And so in a way, it's kind of strange even to see, Andrew Yang himself, who I like and respect, struggle with where to find himself to advocate for this, like on a focused,
he's struggling
consistent
himself.
basis.
I think he's struggling within the party because they'll pull up short every single time and won't really listen to the constituents that have to live with their policies, have to go through the means testing.
Yeah.
And that's a process that needs to be plugged in as a feedback loop.
And that brings it back to, again, my only way to give my feedback to the DNC, to express my displeasure, is to say that although I am a registered Democrat, I reject your choice.
That's not good enough. That's not good enough. We need more feedback.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable voting for some of the down ballot candidates in your state that are Democrats?
Me?
Yeah.
I looked at them. There's no one who is a Humanity Forward candidate that I can vote for. So I will not be voting any down ballot Democrats. I will go vote for Howie Hawkins in the hopes that there will be funding for third parties. I mean, it's not likely, but what is one to do, right?
Oh, I got it. Okay. So Quintus I talked about, and I know Quintus does not believe this will happen, but another friend of mine was suggesting that maybe if we have enough Humanity Forward candidates that start to win their elections, right? Starting now, maybe 2 years from now again. Once we have a few people that are in Congress and really doing the job, they might become a new third party by just uniting and saying, hey, we're going to break off and have our own. What do you think about that, Jill?
That sounds great. Let's do it. For now, the only way I can tell the DNC I'm unhappy is by not voting for machine politicians.
But and that's the thing, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, it's like, this all is coalition politics. There are different points of view, and African Americans were pretty big, and basically I think the whole African American experience has almost led us to, as a group, to be both idealistic and pragmatic at the same time. And so that ends up affecting these things. But I think I'm going to mention something that maybe so this is not just the same conversation that might normally have. It's like I went to church with people in northern New Hampshire, charismatic. Most of them were conservative. I totally understand why they voted for Trump. I see it, because they're frustrated, because at the end of the day, I think all of us are dealing with the fact that our political system is broken. That's the problem. Like the issue about the feedback, not like our political system is broken, and we're all trying to figure out, do our best thing, whether it's voting for this person, voting for that person, or not voting at all, as a way of trying to reboot this system into something that actually works for us all.
Really hard,
well
because
said. You really encapsulated the situation well. I think that's what we're doing. Yeah. And it's just kind of we're all reaching our own conclusions, because by nature we can't take the socially prescribed one, and it's just chaos.
One thing that I have to say about universal basic income is that, and I would say too, is universal health care, is we're kind of having the consequences. And I had 3 teenagers at home, so natural consequences was a great way to get across. One story is my son kept leaving his bicycle unchained at work, and I said, you're going to lose your bike. You're going to lose your bike. He lost his bike, had to walk, to work every day. Natural consequences are kind of awful, but we are getting the natural consequences of not having a floor to poverty. in an emergency, and we're getting the natural consequences of not having adequate health care, however you decide to slice and dice where that comes from. And so the natural consequences are literally screaming out loud. Those of us who want those two things improved, we like I said, we can't let up for a minute. And, I've already started with doing what I can with the podcast. I've been communicating with my state legislature. I went ahead and voted for the down ballot candidates in New Mexico, although we didn't have a humanity forward candidate. We did have ones that were doable, that were trying to protect the environment when they're trying to remove environmental protections. In New Mexico, they're giving us the full food stamp benefits for families, which they could have done all along, but they're doing it right now, so it's keeping families fed. But yeah, I hate that we have to do all of the above all the time, but that's kind of it. Pick an area and drill into it if you want these things to come about, and really, talk to your local representatives, communicate what the universal basic income is. I don't think we have to argue, because if somebody's arguing, you look at them and their arguments are kind of dumb. It's the same 5 things. And there's still a lot of people who've never heard about it and haven't heard even the most basic, 5 characteristics of the basic income. So a lot of the fighting for what we want is communication, repeat. Got to give presidential candidates, and especially Andrew Yang, a lot of credit for literally giving the same speech everywhere he went. But but I'm glad he did, because that's what it takes to communicate, kind of repetition in many different forums. But this is our
Karen,
go ahead.
For those of us who or for those of our viewers that don't know Karen yet, she is making a podcast that is centered on the caregiver role and how the UBI is going to help everybody, because caregivers are really important, but we are not paid in general, unless it's like, you're doing it for someone who you would naturally expect it to care about. Right? If you do it for your own family or for yourself or for somebody that you love, then you're just supposed to do it. It's free.
I want to bring up a point too that came up in my mind, is you can add value to people's lives literally by being an advisor and teaching them something that they need to do, maybe to even monetize themselves, right? I think a lot of the people I meet don't know how to monetize themselves. It's the only reason they're not getting paid for the value they're adding, right? But then if you do try to monetize yourself, maybe you got bad credit because you never had a chance, and now you can't get a loan, right? And so even if you get the added value from someone who donated their time to help you, set up a Discord page or whatever it is, you're not getting the value. People make these YouTube videos of how to do things, right? And if YouTube pays them for it, good. But if they don't, you're still stuck adding value to people's lives and not getting any return for it except for a thank you, right? And so I see people who should be rich, based on how much work they do. And a lot of the Yang members that are making some of the massive changes that are or underway right now, they're not getting jack shit. And it's so difficult for them to survive, and they're trying to balance this stuff out. And then you have them stressed out, and sometimes they have to take a step back, right?
And we totally appreciate Shale for putting in hours and hours of time every week, making sure that our podcast goes out on Spotify with the best sound that we can. And everybody having terrible internet and all, trying to connect to this thing, but we're still doing it every week. And it's a lot of stuff going on in the world. But what I want to get back to again is when we do this. When we do these podcasts, right, we want to be able to speak to people directly about the solutions that we want to bring. And so many people don't know about it. Faye and I are driving around in our cars. Each of us have words on our cars that say, mine says cash for people. And that was from the last event we did way back. but it just doesn't come off. It stays on the car. So everywhere we drive, people are still asking us, what does that mean? Like, what does it hasn't permeated the consciousness of this country, much less the rest of the world. So we have a big job in front of us, and Karen is right to be focused on moving forward that way. So we're still having people ask us every single day that we're out.
Well,
Yeah.
I think there's also this thing that I think that something I think the political right, I think, understands a little bit more than seems to be more explicitly than our political left, is the power of culture. Like, in other words, it's not sometimes a policy, but it's like if the culture doesn't change or shift, then people won't be open to the solutions that will be adopted. You know, and so I mean, so I guess I refer to this in terms of, let's say, I mean, it's natural for me because both sides of my family go back into slavery. So I actually have that thought experiment in my head. It's like, what happens if you're in a culture where people don't even think of you as a human being? Like, until you can start to shift that, you can talk about all these little things that you want to add about voting, and it's not going to do anything. But you need both of them at the same time. And so it's like, how do we shift the culture?
We've been demonizing a lot of people too, right? The people that could be the ones to help save us, we've probably demonized. Or this whole cancel culture stuff. Maybe they've done something we don't agree with, and now we, have shamed them out of existence, right? And yet they might have had the answer to help us this whole time, but maybe their feelings were hurt because of how we treated them.
That brings us back to the lack of communication that we have in our society. And we might cancel someone who's older if you say, okay, boomer, because they said something that we just, really triggers us, like, oh, you should be more responsible for this particular thing, that we feel like, well, there's no way for us to do this the way you did. So there's a disconnect that's happening where, we don't trust our elders anymore. We don't feel like, used to be you were supposed to learn from your elders, right? They give you a path forward in life because they teach you all of these things. But now we feel like they don't even understand the world that we live in. So how can they teach us? The things that they're teaching us are not appropriate for the life, the technology. So it's very difficult right now to trust in an older person like Biden to be the leader, even when we can talk about how human he is and those things.
I'd like to speak to that because Quintus, you made me count how many elections that I've been through in my life, and it was 15. And my parents were super conservative, so I was raised in not just a conservative household, but also very politically active on the right side. And I would say that, yes, people are discounting elders, and I'm a Karen, so I got a whole nother other problem. But try not to be that Karen. But
I'm Asian Karen all the time.
Oh, so yeah, I think it's up to the elders to make themselves aware of the situation their children and grandchildren are waking up in, And I think that's, again, more feedback. One of the things that happens between generations is a certain amount of shaming that goes on. Poor shaming, I call it, where I just don't, understand why this person can't get out of my house, or I don't understand why they don't just, right? I hear that all the time.
I would love to.
Yeah, and so we have not heard from, for instance, right now, I know that all the cameras and microphones are pointed at the election process, but at some point, if we really want to get a grip on what's going on in this country, we need to turn those microphones and those cameras towards people being evicted, towards people that are suffering, towards people, take them in as far as you can go into the COVID wards. I'm really disappointed in the press for doing the safe thing and talking about all this stuff like it's a sports event. I mean, I think that's where a lot of the sports guys ended up retiring, is into politics, because it sounds like sports stuff, to me, and color commentary, going on. But I think one of the things I hope happens from the UBI community is that we do take away that concept that it's your fault if you're poor, and start using the word that Guy Standing gave us about precariat, because the term precariat means that it's putting the onus on the society, how this society is functioning or not functioning. How come we have tolerated so many people being homeless? And I don't mean not tolerating the people who are homeless. I was homeless. My partner was homeless. There's no shame in that because there were circumstances beyond our control. However, we've got to get the shame factor out of there. And that's exactly where the feedback loop needs to be coming from, because typically, believe it or not, homeless people, destitute people, poor people have clarity like almost nobody else has. I tend to call the middle class the muddle class, because when it comes to understanding what could happen to them, they don't realize how precarious they are until it happens to them. There's people coming to food banks that have never been. There's people coming to apply for benefits who've never had to before because of what is going on. So, the time has been long past due that we listen to people and, with open ears and open hearts about what's going on, and don't let up. Get those people, on the record of what's going on. So that's a big beef that I have. And that's part of why I did my podcast. I literally did my podcast because of Joe Biden saying he was going to help caregivers. So then I went and looked at the plan.
Yeah. I think two people here are technically unhoused. Faye Doney lives out of her car, and I live in a living room. So I can't go back to normal. I can't vote for a return to what was already a miserable, untenable existence. I need to go forward with something different and new.
So I want to talk about some family dynamics, the shaming of being poor and all this. Okay, so I talk to my family pretty regularly on my mom's side of the family. And so, like, my little brother, who's 11 years younger than me, and my cousin, who's like around his same age, they're struggling significantly financially, right? And all I hear my mom, my aunt, my grandparents saying is like, they need to get a job. They need to get a job. A job. Okay. And like, just like, I can't wait to get, like, they're just like so exhausted taking care of them, right? And then they're shaming them for not making any money, and here I'm like, guys, there's a big reason why this is happening, and they're just hyper focusing on the individual instead of the society that put them in that situation. It's not just happening to them, it's happening to my other cousin, right? It's happening to, like, other people that I'm friends with. I'm seeing the struggle everywhere, right? But like the shaming upon it is so painful. But then, okay, so I became non-religious, but my whole family's really religious, right? And because I no longer believe in the God that they believe in, I think they're scared to even touch whatever I'm like exploring because it's not within their religion. And I'm like, because I asked them onto the show and they're afraid that I'm going to somehow, I don't know, like change their minds about something. And like, I'm not trying to change your mind about anything. I support you and your religion because if that's what brings you value to your life and you're not harming other people in the process, I'm all for it. Well, I'll even help out if I can, that's what I'm trying to do. And they're like scared of me now, right? And that's how it's coming off. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not a terrible person. I might
Faye, are you on mute?
In alignment with your value system. But regardless,
can you hear us, Quintus? Oh, Quintus lost sound.
Can you guys hear us?
We're still talking.
Okay. Maybe hang up and then call again.
Maybe restart.
Call again.
Yeah.
Gotta use sign language.
Call again.
Hang up the phone.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
The Zoom hand signs.
Oh, maybe we should text him. Should we text him to do that?
I think he's working on it.
Okay.
To back up what you were saying, Faye, about I call it work fetishism. And here's what's going on with my daughter. I don't do direct care. I work with her caregivers. She's in a really good place. Not everyone is in a good, professional care situation. But I got so much pressure from the part of her care team about occupational therapy. So here's the deal. They're doing a crap job, not the care center, but the system of her other forms of therapy. She needs physical therapy, crap job. She needs other things, but they're talking to me about what kind of job that she could have. And I'm like, this is not a person who's going to be able to work. 75% of able-bodied, but have other problem, disabled people couldn't find a job before COVID. Okay. So they're so focused on like a form of occupational therapy that they're missing the other forms of therapy that she needs. And this drives me up the wall, is that we have this expectation that the norm is that we're going to go to work. And I got news for you. That is going away quicker than we thought, because the COVID situation has caused problems with companies protecting their supply lines. So the Philadelphia Fed office came out with a report called Forced Automation. They were talking about how companies are forced to automate much sooner and much more deeply than they were before. And so when Andrew Yang said that a large percentage, he said 40% of jobs would be, the people who had them and lost them would never work again. His numbers were correct, maybe even a little low, just because the numbers have changed since he said that. So we've got a whole different world we're already in. So arguing old paradigms doesn't do anything for us. And it is one of the beefs I have with having septuagenarian candidates, is that the words that come out of their mouth, I'm in the middle between the boomers and between the millennials. Let's say I'm Generation X, like just barely, because otherwise I'd be a Karen and a boomer. So, and so the thing is, I know. So the thing is I got to see kind of how so I was behind the boomers, my generation, and they're still hanging on to their jobs, and it's harder if you're my age. And then seeing what other people are growing up with. And it's like there's a miscommunication definitely between the generations, but the older generations, for example, did not have to learn technology. They didn't have to learn it at all. It never, entered their sphere of a requirement for their job. We had to learn middle of our career years of technology. And then after me is everyone where technology was part of their job, and now even more so. With a new paradigm.
Like learn a new system every other week, it feels like. It's a
roller coaster of learning curves. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, learn every application that every single person that you interact with would prefer to use.
Right.
I feel like I'm learning a ton of platforms right now, and it's exhausting, right? I need to find a way to connect all the projects that I'm working. I need my networks of people to connect and actually communicate with each other. I also have my old friends that I want to meet, like my new friends, the Yang Gang. And I bet you if they met the Yang Gang, my friends would get yanged in a heartbeat and they wouldn't even know it, right? Like, it's just like, wow, this is good,
One of my proudest accomplishments right now is yanging my very Republican mother, and she's all about it now. So,
wow,
yeah, she's almost 80, and don't say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because you can. But I think what got to her, the way I approached her, is the fact that the Republicans did have a quasi-universal basic income program that Milton Friedman was going to do, the negative income tax. And it's like the Republicans that are non-Trumpian might want to go back and look at that and dust that off and update the numbers, but it's still a good option. Whereas maybe Andrew Yang was talking about the VAT and other things. And I never hear anybody talk about quantitative easing that goes on every month, $60 billion to the banks every month. Give that to the people. That would give you about $300 towards a basic income. Is about
Karen,
what it is.
Are you in my Facebook group yet?
Oh, which one? I'll write it down.
My Facebook group is called The Structural Defects of Money, and then -women, because I want to. So I'll send you a link. It's basically facebook.com/ groups / money women.
You're giving me a reason to go back on Facebook then, because I've been staying away from it because of yeah.
Well, our group is not very active, but I think once we hit a critical mass of people who are actually interested in, how money is created by our legislation, and that, how we can actually change those rules, just like monopoly money, you just change the rules of that could really improve our lives. That's what we're focused on. We're not in that group there to talk, how to financially better yourself, how to do that kind of stuff. We're talking about how does the regulatory environment create money and what people really need to know. We want to create a curriculum that we can give out to everybody. But I thought if we started with a women's group, right, we could actually get more people to, I feel like women talk to each other in a different way without sort of getting as, I don't I don't know how to explain it, but I think we're just more kind of cooperative
bumpy too. It can definitely get
complimentary sometimes. Yeah.
It's just that our circumstances, being caregivers, being the first ones, like the first responders for your family, of being now you're a teacher, now you're chief cook and bottle washer at home. Our circumstances, we kind of technically have secondary access to capital anyway. So this idea of a UBI, I'm surprised more women really don't follow what's going on. I definitely think we need to speak more to women, because I think that the problems of not having a basic income or Florida poverty kind of hit us between the eyes a little harder because of the circumstances we typically are in.
Yep. And so I feel like if we get the women together, men in the same room together, and the women kind of get shouted down a little bit, and we tend to be more passive. Not everybody is going to be, but it's kind of, I like everybody to have a chance to participate in a way that's very for them. And then I'd like to take that information and put it out and for everybody to discuss and bump around. But I started the group a while back, and it's been sort of just sitting there lying dormant. But hopefully after the elections, we can stop doing all this politicking and stuff. We can get back to doing that kind of thing, is creating curriculums and teaching.
I think a lot of things that have been in larva stage right now that have started because of the pandemic and by the Yanggang, who finally knows kind of a beginning action plan, right, from Yang's book and his messages. I think once the election ends, people are going to have so much free time, right? So all this money gets sucked into politics, and that's where you need to work. Why you got to do the things, got to make it pretty for election day. And then, then we're back to sitting in our crappy houses. Okay, what now?
In quarantine. Yeah. In quarantine.
Yeah. So I think what's going to happen is the people that have been extra busy are going to whoa, I'm done. But I think there's going to be some leftover momentum from helping on these campaign trails. And then the next step would be launching their own things. I mean, Andrew Yang can't really come on to too many additional, podcasts, hangouts, or whatever, because he's so busy right now. Don't dare try to interview him yet, right? But once that's over, imagine how much more free time he's going to have, and he could redirect that attention, and I think the thing that I like about Yang working alongside Biden is Biden has connections to people in other countries, right? But he has a way of speaking that just makes some sense, right? And so just being around him, anybody he hangs out with is going to be changed even just a little, right? And he's really good at planting seeds and making things make sense. So simply his presence alongside these politicians is already making a difference. And it's only going to continue to grow, I think, especially if Biden wins. So
I think the universal basic income movement is still there. It's international prior to Yang's effort, which was amazing. I think, though, that plug into references in that older movement, because we have people like Guy Standing and Scott Santens and others who are Carl Widerquist, who have been doing a phenomenal legwork in terms of policy, like developing ideas and policy. Guy Standing actually ran a test for the UN in India, where they brought a UBI to villages in India, and they have those results. We need to plug into the pilot studies, some of whom are continuing, some of whom have ended, and they're tabulating the data. We have I think one of the most exciting thing is the Mayors for a Universal Basic Income that Michael Tubbs from Stockton kind of got going. That's a very interesting, because I think that's basically hyper-local, right? When we get hyper-local involvement, that literally is our place to trickle up into society to talk about it in a way that the national discussion just seems on a loop, and still arguing.
What we need to do is actually get all these different groups to talk to each other, right?
Yes.
Imagine if we have multiple countries just actually working together on a systematic level to be like, okay, guys, and other countries already figured out so much more than we have here in America, right? Me and Faye were just talking about like the differences that we have compared to others in the world is they already figured it out, and we're just being kind of stubborn on listening to them or taking their help. But the cool thing is we have the internet now. We can do that person to person, and we don't necessarily need permission to become friends with somebody in a different country working on the same project. We don't have to go through government officials to be like, okay, please talk to this person so we don't get in a fight, okay? No, we can just like reach out, maybe even on their Twitter and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. Let's combine resources. But I think it's also figuring out who needs to talk to who and what stats need to be provided. And I think we can make and build a giant case worldwide. And I think the more this pandemic continues, everyone's gonna feel it. And just even in the deaths that happened, right? They're gonna start recognizing the pain of loss that they've been experiencing. And the collective pain of other people. This is definitely a shared experience. It's just we're feeling it differently. But I think for a lot of us, it's the way we needed to feel it. But pain kind of sneaks up on you. It's not until a while later where you can actually really truly grieve about it. And I think because of politics, we haven't had time to grieve at all. We're too busy and we're fighting too hard.
And I think the interesting thing about, focusing in specifically on caregivers, caregivers have a lot of wisdom also. Because one of the most important things that caregivers know deeply is that it's all about the person that you're trying to care for. I mean, you have to listen hard to what they need, what they want. You could be doing all the work. I'm working so hard for you. I'm doing all this. I made all this food. I spent an hour and a half making this thing. And that person doesn't even want to eat it because he, is not interested in that.
Well, yeah.
So it's like you can do all this trying to provide, trying to give, and it's not going to connect well with the person that you're for if you can't hear their needs and their desires and what makes them feel good about your work. So I think that's really what's lacking in our government is we're doing all of this extra effort, to do things that are not connected to people that we're trying to serve.
And then we make them go through labyrinths of paperwork just to get that help in the first place.
Yeah, that's what I call the system. I call it the labyrinth of despair, because for 20 years I had to deal with the medical care system with my daughter, and I had to deal with the benefits programs of my daughter, and I got stories, man. I got war stories and things that happen. But I mean, ultimately, what is not done, what is not heard, and what's not followed through on really causes so much trauma and pain. And I think what you have is you have a lot of caregivers, for example, having caregiver stress syndrome. And basically that's PTSD for caregivers. And you look at the symptoms of that, And you're starting to see that everyone joined that world because we're trying to take care of ourselves. We're trying to take care of each other. We're trying to take care of society and animals and the whole thing. And you get caregiver burnout is what they call it. But it's just basically you're trying to make up for our society and systems that don't work very well. And it's time. And if you're in the middle of doing it, if someone's listening to me and they're in that middle of that job, I'm retired of that because my daughter's now in a professional care situation, but I'm still her advocate and I'm still advocating for my mom. And I'm still up, well, I'm doing better, but I'm up at night trying not to extrapolate what's happening to other people and other families with COVID. I never had an event like COVID land in the middle of my caregiver time where I had to do everything for the person I love. Plus I had to make sure they didn't get something that would kill them. I mean, that's a lot of burden. And that's a lot of people that are ignored. And it drives me up the wall when people say, oh, if we give money to people, they're just going to sit in their basement and play video games and stuff and whatever. But you ignore all the people who the very next day that we have a basic income are going to do exactly what they did before. And that's take care of their family and take care of their loved ones and their friends. So it's like we need to change the dialogue and the how we respond to it and educate ourselves. And Yang helped a lot for that.
Not only that, there are so many people who've given up on life and are just saying, well, I'm just going to play video games in my basement because I have nothing else to do. And whether you give them a basic income or not, those people will be there doing that. Perhaps with the basic income, they will feel differently, in fact, But that's, you gotta attack it from all sides. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, maybe
you're totally right. You're totally right. Yeah.
Maybe they're beat down and they have despair, that we call it depression. We put it on them.
Right.
That they have depression when it's situational despair, which is not right. And if somebody, like after we get the basic income and have a health care and all those things are in place and they still are doing that, find out maybe they just really like that. That's
right.
Okay.
You know what? Exactly.
Okay.
If that is, that's fine. Who cares? Who cares if someone sits around and all they do with their life is play video games? Is that going to kill you? Go do your own life. Who cares, right? Get out of here.
Wait. Now, wait a minute. We got to lean in on Scott Santens. Now, who is that director that killed Bill?
What was it? Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino. Okay, so remember, Scott Santens came out with his Quentin Tarantino argument for UBI. Have you guys read this?
I read a little. I didn't read it all the way through.
Okay, well, let me just tell you what the Quentin Tarantino argument for UBI is. Okay, so Scott Santens sees this very clearly, and I see it that way too. Which is that when you go and create the video game, this is a huge industry. When you go and create a movie, it's a very big industry with producers. It employs massive numbers of people, and then secondary people to support that primary industry. Right, so you've got all the actors, but then you've got all the people, and then you've got the locations, and then you've got huge enterprises, and everybody's getting paid. And while they're getting their work done, everybody says, "Great, you are very productive, and you are doing so much good work. We're all really proud of you, and here is the money." Right, but on the other hand, the people who are playing the games or enjoying them are being completely ignored, as if if you play the game, you have just created the entire motive for the industry, right? And if you're enjoying a movie, that's why the industry exists, for you. If you were not there, then what are they making all this for? Nobody to watch and for nobody to play? So we have an imbalance in the way that we value people. I mean, if you're accepting a service or giving a service, those two should actually be balanced and equal in our view, right? As somebody who's partaking of a video game should be just as important as the person who provides it. And so, and that's really how caregivers...
supply and demand. Exactly. There's a demand side.
The demand is very important, but not only that, for caregivers, it's the same thing. Like, without my son that I'm caring for, that I love, and I want to provide for him, my existence would be, so much bleaker without him. Like, the point of my life is I have to take care of him, and without him, I would be doing something else, but they would have to find another motive. So the motive for people to continue doing and being and acting and making money, I mean, why do I even need to make money? Once again, it's all about my son. So he's at least as important as I am. And that should be the way it is of the world.
The people that argue that, that way need to be less worried about giving money to people and what they do with it, and more worried about people stopping spending, because that's literally the definition of a recession or a depression, is people don't spend money. Consumer confidence goes down. That's if you're investing, it's because ultimately you want someone to buy the thing that's made by your company that you're invested in. And that blindness to the demand side, and this is something, because I was there in the Reagan economic era, because my parents sent me to that very, very religious college. I actually heard Milton Friedman, the father of supply side economics that we're kind of running into the ground. I actually was in the second row listening to him at college, and he did talk about the negative income tax. And that would be where if you drop below a certain income level, your tax refund would be equivalent to a yearly salary. And he was really pushing that to us poor college students, because we were in the middle of the transition of getting our education. And it's like, where did that go? When they implemented the actual policies based on those ideas, they concentrated on the supply side, give the people, the quote, job creators, or they said those were the job creators, the people that run a company, but the real job creators is us. When we want to buy something, we want something that we're willing to pay for. That's the beginning of the business cycle, not if somebody invests in a company. If they got something we don't want, or they make a movie we don't like, then that's what they need to be attracting. And I don't know, I'm watching a lot more TV than I used to, just because we're home a lot. And I'm kind of thankful for some of the goofy stuff I've been watching. Honestly, whoever produced it, I've been thankful for the guilty pleasure for me is watching 18th century romance with the Bronte sisters and that kind of stuff.
But
BBC.
One thing that again, it's like the balancing of the supply and the demand. Like, well, you could be out there just cranking out movies, but if you're cranking out movies that nobody wants to watch, then you're wasting your life. I mean, you could produce, right? But it's like everybody's like, wait a minute, you're really good at, then maybe you ought to move on to something else. It's really about, I mean, it's really about the demand. The demand is actually more important. Yes. I mean, what is useful is when somebody else actually needs it, right? Or so that's why actually it was named the Quentin Tarantino. Okay, it's not just why did he bring up this person of all people? Because Quentin Tarantino once said that the way that you become a great movie producer is that you just watch a lot of movies and you become enamored with them and you love them so much that it's almost, if you go to then make a movie, it's impossible for you to make a bad one, because of how he became a movie maker studying, not by going to school and saying, oh, let someone teach me all the ins and outs of movie making and all. He said, I just loved movies so much, I was able to see what I really create the thing that I could imagine people wanting, right? Because he himself was the consumer of this product. And so, if Shale loves his music, or if, Faye is playing her ukulele and she gets better and better at it over time, then it becomes something that is useful to her and to other people. And the actual participating in these things that we just think is, not as frivolous because it's not getting paid right, is part of your training for becoming a master at whatever it is you're doing.
So, like, I was having this thought the other day that nobody wants to read the prologue until they already fell. Okay. And so, like, everybody is a book, if you will, right? And we all have prologues. And, we have stories. Some of us live really adventurous stories. Some of us are very simple, and that's okay too, right? But it's not until you've become love that people even take the time to look into your prologue, and then it's just like, okay, welcome back. Can you hear us now? Still can't hear us?
Try talking and see if we can hear you, Quintus.
Well, I think I
see Quintus, his circle going green, so there's audio being picked up.
Right? So, but he can't hear us.
Can you hear us, Quintus?
There's a
man. Gosh.
There's a like a headset symbol, right? You would see the symbol being needed. So I don't know how to help him troubleshoot with that. Okay, so our guest today, Dr. Quintus Jett, is having some technical difficulties, but we're continuing our discussion amongst ourselves now. So Shale, were you a lover of, you were a sound and you were trained as one, or did you just come to love it so much?
I have no formal training as an audio engineer, but I learned it through, through like an internet community when I was in college, but it wasn't at the college I was at. It was a group called Overclocked Remix, which we like get together and rearrange video game music just to entertain each other. Like this organization spontaneously started to exist in like 1999 when I was like 16 or 17. And that's when I got involved. I just started listening to it then. And it wasn't for like 3 years that I actually like developed well, actually, no, that's not true. Like a year later, I submitted a song as a joke, but it was really bad. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just like I was playing guitar and singing like jokey lyrics to the Zelda theme. But really, I was just in awe and like secretly very envious of all these guys that could do this electronic music that I really wanted to learn, you know? So it wasn't for a couple of years that I got the courage to like integrate myself into the community and start asking those people to teach me, and they did. But that's how I have no formal training as an audio engineer or a composer. Actually, I have one. I did actually have a music theory course in high school, so that was actually very useful too for composition, but not for audio engineering. I just got very lucky going to a public school that offered that, you know. And it wasn't like I went to a real bougie school either. Just very good luck this one time. I don't know.
Well, I certainly don't remember a class like that in my high school, so I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't want to take a language, so I thought I was just like outsmarting the system, but the system actually tricked me into learning. So, score one system. Only really good thing I learned in high school probably is music theory, and I'm sure my teacher thought I was just being obnoxious the whole time he had me too. But yeah.
Did you ever go to college?
Yeah, I did. I did go to college. I didn't go for music though. I went for English for some reason.
So you decided to do English while you were there? Yeah,
I thought there's no work in music, and I was right, but there's also no work in English, as it turns out. As it turns out, there's simply no work, and that is the issue. And here we are. True. I wish Dr. Quintus were here.
So you completed your college degree? Did you end up getting a bachelor's or?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's in English. I've never used it for anything. It's like 15 years old at this point. It's trash.
What about the whole idea of the liberal arts, you know, expanding your horizons?
That's just a way of codifying the classes and preserving them from generation to generation, making sure that middle-class kids stay middle-class kids. Poor people don't get middle class, rich people don't get middle class.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, did not feel that it was useful.
Nope.
So, okay, for my college education, though, because I have an associate's in arts that took 3 years to get, and then I did a year towards a bachelor. Originally, I was thinking biology, and then thanks. But because of this desire for this degree, though, I learned techniques how to teach myself. Because, like, when I went for psychology, that was really just trying to, like, teach myself how to be my own therapist, if you will. Because, like, I had a lot of questions. Essentially, it boils down to my partner meth and was stealing from me, lying to me, cheating on me. I I was like, how can anyone do this to another person? Or how does one become this? Right? And that was my just like burning question. And since then, that's where a lot of this research came out of, like trying to understand why people could make these decisions. And my research was money to a lot of the times. But like now that I'm doing the work that I'm doing, I notice myself pulling these techniques I learned while being in college and using that. It's not the knowledge I learned in college, it rhymed, but it's the techniques I learned in college that I'm like, oh, I've done this already. And so it almost gives confidence. Like I took a hip hop dance class, right? So now I have confidence in dancing. But when I feel like maybe I can't dance, I'm like, well, you know what though? I've learned something before, and I've learned from others, and I can draw back and just have some confidence. But yeah, have I actually used my degree? Not technically.
So yeah, this is the interesting question, I think, is the schooling that we're getting, right, of any actual application to the real world these days? And I would suspect that it's going to be less and less useful for us, whereas caregiver skills would become more and more useful to us. And that's not something that we have any emphasis on right now. So Faye and I have been watching this Chinese YouTuber earlier today. She is has a lot of views because there's a lot of Chinese people in the world. And she is someone who left her name is Liziqi, Liziqi. And you can find her YouTube channel easily online. She is very popular because as a young person.
Can you hear us now?
Oh man, he's been popping in and out.
Maybe that was him waving goodbye.
I mean,
saying goodbye to
at least, yeah. I guess that was that.
So
anyway,
Lisa T.
Anyway, I hope he makes it back. But
yeah, I hope so. Lisa T is so she is a young person who left her hometown out in the couldn't just went to do the normal thing. The normal thing is you leave your rural area, right? And you go into the big city, you find yourself a good factory job. This whole, get yourself a job, everything will be fine. She got herself a job, and she was basically not making enough money to live well. So she kept being out on the street sometimes, or, just kind of having terrible living situations, and then going to work every day. And she felt that her life was awful, was terrible. And then her grandparents, and so she decided to go home, back to her rural area. And then she realized from her experience that the people in the city really don't know where their food comes from. They don't have any connection to the land anymore. They don't know how to do anything. They don't know where how the plants look when they're small or when they're grown or mature or all the stages. And so she started just making videos. She's like, I'm going to share some of this with my city friends, right? And it became a whole thing where she's now showing you, her videos are often called the life of something. So today we're watching the life of cotton. She shows you, the seed as it's growing. She shows you every stage of how you, harvest that and what you do with it to take the seed out, fluff it, and make batting with it, and so on and so forth. And she does it all herself. And the crazy thing is she's very young. She's probably younger than our Faye right here. And she is doing all of this by hand, using traditional methods at home. No man around. It's just her and her grandmother, the two of them. And so it's just very inspiring. And I feel like that's the kind of knowledge that is going to be actually more useful to us, right? I'm sending my children to go sit in a school, right? And for 12 years be taught how to sit in a chair quietly while the teacher writes things on the blackboard and tells them to read books. I feel like, what are they missing out on? Versus, there's this amount of time you spend doing this versus you could be spending that 12 years, out in the fields learning things. I feel like that would be a lot more useful.
Or just so watching her and her child, though, she has been doing a lot of gardening with child, and just watching her teach her kid that, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. But then she also has time to throw on that video where this woman is teaching, and he's such a young age, she's absorbing it much better than if my age, right? But also just like choosing places to go. He's like, I don't want to do this thing, and he put his heels in the ground, right? And so then there's an opportunity. Okay, well, what are things like, And so there's this process of like finding the thing he's actually expecting or excited for, and it can still be geared towards, improving his knowledge. Going to a museum, unless it's closed because of COVID.
Well, Zipper and I are homeschooling together, so something that probably some of our listeners don't know about. But my son is 6 years old, he's turning 7, and I'm trying to teach him from a low-income rural community where I'm not really in the rural area. I don't have my own land, right? As you think of a rural area as you have wide expanses of land where you have land, if nothing else, and I don't have that. I'm in a low-income housing behind the Walmart in the city sort of, environment. But we're far away from all the city resources. And so what does homeschooling look like when you don't have any, when you don't have city resources and you don't have any land? So we're like basically gardening with the national, like the state park system. We're going out to the Caddo areas and taking a class there where the garden is sort of ours because we volunteer there. Or we have to, ask a friend to allow us to maybe start a garden on his land to be able to learn these things. And it's not easy to do. And I wish that, if this universal basic income were to happen, right, then perhaps we would be able to afford our own little homestead in our own space. Or we would be able to move to someplace to be close to our family who is out in California or, in a city area. So we're just stuck here right now. But we'll do the best that we can for as long as we can. So
what I like about seeing it though is just there's this very solution or no how to put it there's the goal of knowledge is at the core, not down kind of thing, and he gets excited to read books, and those books can be about, reptiles and dinosaurs, right? But, you might have that opportunity in school as well, but what if the message was catered to the child and not this, like, template that everyone expected? Do you expect a fish to be able to climb a tree and succeed the same? You've probably seen one of those little cartoons or whatever. It's like, we're not the same. We're not. And to judge us the same quiz.
Well, that's the main problem I have with school is that it's not personalized. It's that top down. We're trying to provide. We're providing. And the whole time we're also judging, right? Are you taking everything in? You get tested and you get all these grades and you're being judged on whether or not you're performing to this particular level. That some committee has gotten together. All children need to know this at exactly this age, right? And this is where you have to be at every week, every 2 weeks. We're going to test you. This is where you're supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And it doesn't give the children any chance to make their own choices. It doesn't allow them the chance to prioritize properly. Like they shouldn't be at their age prioritizing the needs of the institution above theirs. They need to be prioritizing, like, do I need to get some rest because I'm tired? Do I need to eat, right? Do I need to, like, how do I take care of myself? And then we have children growing up into adults who don't know how to take care of themselves. All of a sudden they just pop out of school and they're like, well, I usually don't eat until some bell rings and tells me to eat. And then the food just shows up. And then I don't know, like, I never had to do my laundry. How often do I do? And just like organizing your life is so difficult when you haven't had to do it. And I feel like we're really hobbling the kids when we don't give them the chance to do like the traditional. This is how people used to live. Humans used to live, where they didn't go by the clock and the hours chiming telling you to go from one classroom to another all day.
So we have these people that are coming like into adulthood that or well, maybe not adulthood, but like they were born in technology now, right? Like little cell phones, and they understand how to. So their education is actually starting sooner with more opportunity, and so, you know, we're hoping that they are playing are actually helping, but what we started off with is nothing like what they're starting off with. And for me to watch this happen is exciting, honestly, because I'm just curious to like see the next generation. But if they don't even have a footing, you know, they have all this knowledge now, going to make money, so they do it. I think honestly, with the way they're going, they're going to have to watching videos on how to garden, you know, but hopefully they have space to garden because you know, that's where society's heading, at least.
Well, that's, I think, where the disconnect is too, because we have a lot of older people in our community, and that's who we socialize with a lot. Our elders, I think, don't realize that they think that we're very rude because as young people now, we don't teach our kids to write thank you notes. And we don't teach them the right things, you know, the things that are about putting your phone away and really paying attention to the person that you're talking to, being quiet when your elders are talking, or, you know, there's a certain set of moral things that they expect us to be teaching because that's what they learned. But honestly, those are not the things that are going to serve kids, and which is why we don't teach them anymore. Like, who writes thank you notes? We write thank you emails, and we or a thank you text, you know. And we have like a whole set of there's so many social things that we have to learn in order to deal with the social realm that we're existing in, the Zoom calls, right? And the texts and the like 800 different platforms that you might be using, you know, different time zones, dealing with people who are now, we're connected to people differently. We're no longer connected to only people who are close to us, next to us. And like living a 24-hour cycle with the president tweeting at 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, how do you handle sleep in that situation? You know, we're no longer just daylight hour creatures. We have to be up in the middle of the night to tweet, you know, for work or something ridiculous like.
I have to laugh.
I can't.
This is like the only time I can participate with the Yanggang Roundtable because I am just not all there in the morning. And you guys, I'm a couple hours off Eastern time, so I'm laughing because this is it for me because it's a little bit later in the day and I can participate. So I appreciate that. You guys are rediscovering everything that those of us who homeschooled in the past discovered, and I did that. I homeschooled 3 kids, and they were all different style learners. My oldest one had dyslexia. My middle one was advanced in ADHD, and my daughter was developmentally delayed. So we were all over the map, but we eventually did what a lot of homeschoolers do and did student-driven learning. And that, you know, we're going to have a lot of changes in society from the disruption that has occurred. But parents discovering that they can not only teach their kids the ABCs and how to go potty in the correct way, but they can also teach them other things or guide them. And it can be a really fun adventure. And I felt like I had the childhood, you know, that I didn't have being stuck in sitting in a chair all day when I homeschooled my kids. It doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing, but realistically, definitely, we need that universal basic income to pay for supplies, to support those interests. I was in a financial situation where my son wanted to learn how to build archways, and that was a great way to teach angles and math, you know. So he built beautiful garden archways, but we had to get the lumber, we had to have the tools, you know, this is what we could be doing if we had a government that even remotely, I think they live in sort of like financial gated communities where they don't really feel it. And we were kind of having some Biden or Trump talk earlier. I don't feel like that class of person can relate to people who don't have what they need. I think the middle class is trained not to think about poverty unless they skirt into it and out. And those of us who are in poverty have been shamed not to talk about it or say anything. It took me a while to be comfortable talking about being homeless because I was homeless due to domestic violence. And now I'm like, I'm going to talk about it. And when I haven't been able to talk about it, I've been able to talk to people who are going through it right now. Then the best thing in the world we could do for families of all kinds and in all situations is the universal basic income, especially right now. And the fact that nothing even remotely like a stimulus one check even happened is maddening. We're probably teaching our kids how not to have a government. Not how
Oh,
a government
wow.
shouldn't run, right?
Well, yeah, I've definitely, lived more of a sort of a middle class life all of my life, and I've slowly, descended into the hell of living in poverty. But and I remember when I did not know these things, right? There are a lot of things that I learned along the way, and so I don't have any, antagonism towards middle class and wealthy people because I feel like I was one of them, and I understand how it is when you don't have to see those things and you just never have an experience of it. But it does make a huge difference now that when I live in poverty, I can tell that I'm a different parent than I was before, and it's not just the that I've changed or anything. My experiences have changed. No, I'm kind of still the same person. And it's not because my child is all that different, but really the circumstances I live in dictate how I need to parent, right? Because in the past, if you have enough money, right, nothing really matters that much. If you break something, well, we'll just buy another one. It's no problem. But now that, if you live in poverty and you say, well, if you break that, we will never get another. We might never, not, in your entire lifetime, get another one. And so now it feels much more dire. And so, you have to prevent.
Mindset.
Yeah, you have to prevent these horrible. Every disaster could set you back so far, and also the people that you live around you as much, and so you want to prevent your children from getting into a situation where they're going to be attacked by somebody in your community. And it's not like the wealthy parents who gather together and their children can fight each other and break or do whatever, fine, because you're all middle class together and you're all, there's a level of trust that just goes without saying. But when you're poor, people do not trust you. They think that there's something wrong if, wary around you.
They're wary of getting free things from people too, some people are wary of like, oh, that's a free service. There's got to be some reason for that. It's a less quality, or there's some kind of scam attached to it. Like, oh, you just wanted me to get in the door, didn't you? So there's these like subtle mindsets that I think, appear out of places.
But definitely, you need resources in order to, right? You can't learn, like, you're not going to learn racquetball, and you have a racket, and you don't have a teacher, and you don't have, like, there's a lot of things that just require you to have the resources in order to do it. And I think that's something that people just believe, that children are all equal, they're all born equal, and so if we just provide them with school, that will be enough. Just provide them, everybody, with the same exact school, with the same exact curriculum, then we'll even it all out. No,
but the thing is,
wealth is like absolutely the amount of money going to be determinant. What kind of opportunities you get.
But even with the schools are different, right? If you come from a higher tapped into money education tools, right? I saw this thing where it was like this indoor, what do you call it? The planetarium, maybe? Like they blew up this big balloon and people went inside and there's a projector part of the planetarium. And the comment on it was like, not all schools are created equal. What the hell is caption was like, oh, remember the guys? No, it's our childhood was different. What exposure we had is different. Did you have speakers come in and tell you about their experiences, or did you just have full of propaganda? I don't know.
That's a pretty good example.
Just saying.
Yeah, but the amount of I used to have children in I still do. So a couple of my children are in the wealthiest school districts in all of Washington State, and some of Washington, and we're talking about, the tech sector where people are super wealthy. And so they had enough money to replace every single school in the Bellevue School District with a brand new school. And I came from places where, if you didn't have enough classrooms and they would bring a temporary building, that would become a permanent temporary building, right? You never ever got the actual real.
I'm pretty sure that happened in my school.
Right? I mean,
like, mobile home, if you will, that got put out there, and just like they're like, oh, I guess we're gonna build stairs to it now and a platform, and then like I think they got multiple of those, right? And then
I had that too. I think that happened to like 2 out of 5 American kids, maybe 3 out of 5, who knows, of the last 30 years.
Well, Bellevue School District decided they were going to rebuild every single school from scratch just because they could. So they did, one at a time, and they moved the kids around, shuffled them around until they built one at a time. And they also had enough money. They would do fundraisers. Like, it always had wine involved. And I was always like, I don't drink wine, so I don't understand this. But, it'd always be like the wine fundraiser. They had one where...
How did you get through all those fundraisers without ever drinking the wine?
I couldn't really participate because at that point I was already a single mom. Down trajectory. So they were, but I would read about the fundraiser, and it would be like they bought a guitar for every single classroom in the school. This is an elementary school. And each classroom got to decorate their guitars and had their guitars sent back to be lacquered and laminated and all, whatever. And then they would sell these for a large amount of money at the fundraiser that would be located in a museum, the Museum of Music that they, reserved for the night. And they also had fundraisers where, the women went to and the men went to the golf. And at the end of the golf course, they parked an SUV, which was the prize if you won your golf tournament.
Oh,
it sounds like so much money.
It's so much money spinning. So for our school, they once bought, but still the same problems exist in the school, right? So they had after all of this fundraising, they bought pianos for the entire, for the music program. They had these electric pianos, and it would be 2 students to a piano. So you put your head and you could hear yourself and the teacher. Okay, so it was really cool. But since my son already knew a little piano, the teacher's like, well, we're going to be teaching basics, so you just play whatever you do yourself. So he didn't really learn anything from that experience. Then they had like all of these bicycles. They bought bicycles for all the kids so they could have a bicycle unit for their gym class. Well, my son didn't know how to ride a bicycle. And so they said, well, we don't have anybody to actually teach you. We just have the bikes. So you'll just sit this one out. And I was like, so you bought all this equipment, but you're not actually able to provide that personalized instruction, right? What was the point? It was like...
So there's so much money being spent on these things. Like I'm just thinking about my school. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, there was 6 8th graders, so it's not like you necessarily need a bunch of equipment either, right? But like, wow, yeah.
But the amount of money, the disparity between the types of experiences you could have with one school, in a wealthy community versus a community that has nothing. They've got a dirt field and they've got, some balls and some what do you call those, like bean bags or something. This is their equipment. It's incredibly difficult for people to imagine when you live in one and you haven't seen the other. So I'm just speaking to Karen's point that, these things happen in our society because of that disparity, and we don't talk well to each other, and we need to. Now, we want to provide kids with better opportunities. We're going to need the universal basic income. So each person can decide and have some basic level of resources that they can provide for all the children. Well, we're coming up on our couple of hours together. Do you want to go ahead and do our sign-offs now?
Yeah, let's do that. We're gonna do some gaming at 8. So
Okay.
Yeah. Do you guys have any sign-offs to do?
Yeah, I'll do mine. So my Twitter handle is Tisdoney, Tisdoney. Just still looking for any help for anything that you've seen across our country in your personal life. I'm making a documentary, and so, but I mean, I'm also investigating. So if you have a story that you feel like you have no voice, let's talk, and maybe we can even get you on the show. This is important for everybody to have a voice, and I think this is a good platform for it. So that's my say today.
Karen, how can people find you and become a guest on your podcast?
Oh, okay. Yes, my Twitter handle is @CareworthCast because my podcast is called the Careworth Podcast, asking the question, what is care worth to society, and tracking how universal basic income would help caregivers. And you can find my website, careworthpodcast.com, and that's where you can find a little player that has all the episodes. Faye Downey was on there with me. It was really great. That was a lot of fun. And if people want to be a guest, just contact me, PM me on Twitter, and let me catch up, because man, when I started this thing, I didn't know how much behind the scenes work I was going to have to do. So I'm a little slow out of the gate, but I don't know if it matters, because it's all about talking over the top.
Learning curve. It's just a learning curve.
Exactly. Plus, we have this political season to get through too. So I'm just trying to be there for the next phase to talk about. Of course, the universal basic income should be for everybody in all circumstances, but how it would particularly help caregivers. And that's what I'm doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I hope that we can get Dr. Quintus on your show, because Dr. Quintus Jett is an extraordinary caregiver who seldom, brags about his accomplishments in that area. He's doing that for his mom right now. So my name is Faye Koo, and I invited Karen to my Facebook group, and I would like to invite you too, the listener. It's called The Structural Defects of Money Women's Group, and you can find it at www.facebook.com/groups/moneywomen. And I'm also at Palestine Math on Twitter.
All right. My name is Shale. Thanks for hanging out with us, giving us your time and attention. My Twitter is SHAELRILEY, Shale Riley. That's my Twitter. We're going to be back with some gaming, some social hanging out on YouTube and Twitch sometime between now and 8 o'clock, and we're going to go till hopefully 11 or so Eastern. So maybe see you. See you then. Goodbye.